Did you know that fairies hate iron? Iron. All the old folklore of Western civilization says so. English, Irish, Scottish, Nordic, Germanic.
What is it about having 26 protons in your nucleus that makes ethereal creatures despise you?
Iron makes up a lot of your blood. It's great for making melee weapons and steel beams too. It's also really heavy. I'm sorry if I'm being a little confusing right now. It's just something really unnerving happened and no one else is talking about it, so I'm gonna have to be the one to deliver the message. Once upon a time, every culture from the misty forests of Europe to the snowy mountains of Japan believed in entities that interwove with the wilderness. But as time marched onwards, the fairies, elves, and other nature spirits vanished from religion and lived only in stories not meant to be true. Have you ever wondered why? Or what that did to us? The answer is made of iron.
While I was looking into where the fairies went, I found a place. I did a lot of reading. I watched some videos too, like this interview with the guy channeling an elf named Barata.
Alright, it's Barata.
Hi, Barata.
Also, this guy who claimed to see the fairies and was gonna go for a walk with his magic staff.
Have a walk with my magic staff.
I'm gonna clean myself up, and then I'm gonna tell you something really important.
The fairies were taken from us, taken from our minds. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel it to be true. There are two reasons this happened that unfolded over centuries, nay, millennia. Also, I almost forgot there's a knowledge train coming in about. Wouldn't you know it, the knowledge train brought me an awkwardly large whiteboard. So here's the knowledge. In order to understand fairies, we first should understand the word. So most of us are used to the spelling with an I, you can see right here, but actually the original Old English spelling is spelled with an E, which is often shortened to Fay. This will prove useful so that I can switch between saying fairy and Fay and not have to say the same word over and over again. This brings us to the first reason why the fairies went away, why they were taken from our minds. Reason number one, the lie. Deceit, deception, misrepresentation. The word fairy automatically creates images of Tinkerbell and innocent fluttering sprites that ring with joy and sparkle with positivity. Easily digestible, romanticized, but far from the old truth. As Game of Thrones and even Harry Potter taught us, even in stories where magic is real, life is not always or usually fluttering fun. Take a real-life example, the Banshee. A staple of Scottish and Irish folklore. Her scream is an omen of death, yet the original Gaelic word literally translates to the fairy woman. We see the Banshee as a ghost, but she's been a fairy all along. We've been led to believe that the fluttering creatures of the enchanted forest are nothing but innocent, happy fun. And I'm not done with sources of negativity in the fairy realm. Oh no. Fae, or the wee folk, or the people of peace, are known to be quite mischievous, in spite of that last name for them. One old Irish legend says that they once kidnapped a woman and took her to fairyland, which was so mind-meltingly beautiful that she danced until her toes fell off. Never got her toes back. In fact, the Scots-Irish root of the word Fae is spelled Sith, like Sith Lords, as in Darth Maul. But Sith is pronounced she in the old tongue, like Ban-She. That's the intro to Fairies 101. But hey, let's avoid an informative ear beating, and what do you say we check out the place in which the Fae live? Yeah, you want to go to Fairyland? I'll take you. All I ask is that you close your eyes, unless you don't trust your environment. Now, I'll paraphrase a passage I found along my journey. Rest your mind in that space before thought. In that space, which is a dimensionless point, breach the veil to a different place where the mind no longer breaks up the flow of experience. There, briefly arises the shining realm of fairy. Welcome to Fairyland. There's lots of little critters dancing around here. The vibe is real good, but only when your vibe is real good. See, everything in Fairyland is a reflection of what's happening in your psyche, but as long as nothing catches you off guard,
That pebble caught me off guard, and now I'm stuck in a negative thought loop. Ants! Fake moles! It's good to be back. That's the power of meditation. I did just want to say that emotional roller coasters like that aren't at all uncommon in Fairyland, and also that time here works really wonky, so I should really get going. I don't want to be gone for like 200 years. I feel like I've showed you the lay of the land, how the transcendental realm really works, fairies, light and dark. You got it. Let's go.
I realized I haven't introduced myself yet. Hi, I'm Grant. I'm not sure whether or not you believe in fairies, but if you're still watching, then I'm guessing you at least respect the idea they represent. Now that the lie has been cleared up, that idea should be a little more clear. They are the divine from the oldest times, and that means they reflect every corner of human experience, from hellish torment to eternal bliss. That's how reality has always been, and that's why people used to take fairies a lot more seriously, because they weren't just Tinkerbell. This brings us to the second reason the fairies were taken from us. Reason number 2, the assault on nature and the imagination. I had to get some new threads on for this reason. This reason is a little more complicated. For now, just know that it's tragic, and worst of all, it made society boring. To better understand how Mama Earth and the thing that SpongeBob loves were both assaulted, let's get a little more knowledge in here. We don't even need the train this time, though I would like it. J.R.R. Tolkien, in his essay on fairy stories, said that fairy stories always take place in an enchanted realm called fairy. Notice the IE at the end, which of course comes from actual folklore. Fairy stories, he says, are a natural development of the interaction between the human imagination and language. The imagination is a pretty important thing. Everything ever accomplished by the intellect was born in the imagination. It's where emotions build worlds. It's also where the Fae come from when the melody of nature is just right. By now I've probably said a million times that fairies are nature spirits, and a subset of said nature spirits, called elementals. If you've ever summoned an elemental in Skyrim or D&D or whatever, then you've really just called upon a spirit of nature. Water, fire, earth, air. It's all in the old ways. Fairies and sprites are air elementals, elves and gnomes, earth, mermaids and undines, water, and salamanders are fire. Yep. Salamanders. Chances are your feet touch concrete a lot more often than dirt, so it's not surprising that elementals have left our religions. Over the last 2,000 years, the gods have changed from lots of little ones all around us to one god up above, plus a messiah, and also the lady who gave birth to said messiah, even though she never invited anyone into her secret box. This holy trinity was the first widely accepted metaphysical worldview that had nothing to do with the place before supermarkets. It changed everything. Bird noises were replaced by the clanky hum of life in the city. Once monotheism got hip, it was a mad pave-over of the place where the elves live. Once upon a time, human minds felt more than they thought. Now, it's the other way around. This new god that was a concept was more of an idea than an experience. That's not to say that believers in monotheism don't have religious experiences. Allow me to clarify. God with a capital G is not experienced as hallucinations that match the vibe of the melody outside. He is in a book that can be printed by a printing press, preached about at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., and 5 p.m. on Sundays, not channeled according to the weather and seasons. This God's world is built on calendars and ticking clocks. It's a very rational world, and so once we entered this world, our minds changed. We just kept thinking. Think. We all collectively did. God was now more a concept than an experience. No longer were we lost in the brutal eternal symphony out in the trees. No longer were we feeling the vibe of our environment. We had cities to build. The human experience was going to be its own thing, and we weren't going to get distracted by all the stuff happening outside. We were going to build a world away from mosquitoes, predators, and mosquitoes. Here's the thing though, to escape the natural worlds that instinct built, we let the rational minds take over, man. The rational mind, otherwise known as the intellect. It's the opposite side of you than your instincts. Together, they make up two sides of the coin that is the human mind. I'm talking about thoughts versus feelings, the rational versus the irrational, the intellect versus the imagination. Both sides serve a purpose, but when the balance between them shifts, the world changes. That's why the mythical creatures faded away until they entirely ceased to be. So why did this balance shift? Well, first there was the Jews, but monotheism really got off the ground around the year 0 for obvious reasons. Then there was Muhammad and Allah, and the monotheism trilogy was complete. One god with a capital G usurped the ethereal creatures out in the wilderness. He overshadowed the oft feminine spirits of nature. Instincts were repressed for better and worse. Nobody seemed to mind though, because you could just think about this new god in your head without really having to be outside where it's cold sometimes. It was a smash hit. Plus, sin was now original, and that really caught on. There were 10 pretty strict and straightforward commandments. Thou shalt not murder is cool, but not worshipping other gods feels like an insecure move to me. Individual feelings were repressed for piousness towards a god generic enough to be believed in by billions. Society got more rigid. That's why paintings in medieval times were all ugly babies and people looking meh. Repressed self-expression made art suck until Geoffrey Chaucer came out with the Canterbury Tales in the 1400s. That was kind of like the first super legit thing in a while. And then 100 years later, bam! The Renaissance! The Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo, and all the other Ninja Turtles, and Shakespeare. The old gods were still so far away, but clearly something was happening. A revival of our emotional capacities was happening, though our imagination was not unfazed by being fit into the neat box of rationality. The rational mind was about to flower into something unprecedented. That's when Bacon invented the scientific method. Sir Francis Bacon. That meant logic had finally given birth to its baby named science. Science has done a lot of incredible things ever since. It's given us medicine and technology, and I'm super into that, but it doesn't have positive things to say about fairies. With science, something can only be fed through the truth detection machine if it's tangible, if it can be weighed or measured. You can't do a scientific experiment on a feeling or a fairy. Therefore, by a purely logical analysis, a fairy can't be real. Then again, neither can God with a capital G, but he's so abstract that you can just make vague statements about how he's in everything instead of invisibly fluttering around a holly tree in your backyard. You could say believing in fairies is more bold and less rational. But how about this question? Do you believe that some people believe they see fairies? Some people are liars and storytellers, and others just mistook an echo for elf chatter. But surely there are those who genuinely believe they saw a fairy right in front of them. It's just a matter of whether or not their imagination is a part of reality. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that fairies are real because the imagination is real. What I will say is that the imagination and all the gooey feelings that ooze out of it were made to fit into a very rational box, and it's caused a lot of gargantuan changes. Now, our minds connect more with a god that's closer to a philosophy than a forest. Since the Renaissance, science continued to evolve by leaps and bounds. New machines were created, perfected, and mass-produced. A society as mechanized as its prized creations was forming. The societal machine cared little for the biological world it was built on, and so it choked the oceans, corrupted the air, and stripped the earth. The Industrial Revolution was upon us, and it brought cities that reeked of soot and human waste. Weapons of war were also perfected. The dawn of the 20th century brought a perfected taste for war so palpable that Europe became a powder keg poised to end 40 million lives. Part 3. The Fairy Revival. They're coming back from the primordial heart! In the early 1900s, there were some people who had no interest in the impending Great War. One of those people being William Sharp, a red-faced and very facial-haired Scotsman who co-inhabited his body with a fairy named Fiona. Thanks to her help, Sharp once wrapped his arms around an elm tree and felt his soul flow in the sap circulating through the tree. So why am I telling you about this kind of far-out guy? Well, he was besties with a guy you may have heard of, William Butler Yeats. One of the most famous poets of the 19th and 20th centuries. Maybe you've heard of him. Yeats admits that everyone who knew Sharp was, quote, under the spell of the Fiona myth. Indeed, our bearded man-lady fairy and his direct connection with nature deeply inspired Yeats, who often wrote about the wilderness and the folly of civilization. During World War I, when the world was shaken to its core by poison gas and artillery, Yeats wrote his brilliant poem, The Second Coming. The last verse is as follows. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. The rocking cradle, the 20 centuries of stony sleep, the slouching towards Bethlehem. I think he's talking about the Christian Messiah, Yeshua, otherwise known as Jesus Christ. Is Yeats saying that the birth of Jesus knocked the first domino in a rally that would climax 2,000 years later with World War I? As though Jesus is responsible for World War I? Seems a little harsh to me. Or is he pointing out that the rise of monotheism brought with it a paradigm shift for civilization that brought our minds to a new kind of place, where an intimate connection with the natural world was severed so that we could coldly study the world and craft things a fairy would never imagine or allow? So, is that it for the fairies? Have they been permanently discarded by our society of machines? Or are they coming back? I admit I've been a little hard on civilization up until now. It's not all war and concrete. I like grocery stores and vaccines, and I like air conditioning and the Lord of the Rings movies. I just wish there was a little more magic outside of fiction. I just miss the fairies is all. It would be good to know if they're even still around. The easiest way to do that is to go to an enchanted forest at twilight. So let's go do that.
Ow. Indigenous cultures from North America to Ireland to Japan all believed that sunrise and sunset were the magical times of day when the ethereal and the material planes merge. It's the best time to see fairies, and also, photographers know this time of day as the magic hour because, the lighting's really good. And also remember, the people of peace are not always peaceful, just like our feelings inside of us are not always kind. In Irish folklore, Fay have been blamed for disease, baldness, and mental illness. If you cross paths with one and you aren't respectful, they might aim that back at you with divine intensity. There's one old Irish story about this guy who saw a group of really attractive fairies playing in a river, and he stared a little too creepily, and then he woke up the next morning, was blind. Which is pretty harsh, but I mean, come on, dude. It makes me wonder, can nature have wrath? When Yeats put pen to paper, the beast he was talking about was obviously World War I. But there's another beast that slouches towards us in our time. It stirs from the elements we exploited for 20 centuries. Things could have been different. Instead, we built a global culture that communicates electronically in synthetic cities of urban sprawl. We live to the tune of ticking clocks and bank account balances. It's an artificial hum with a sometimes grating tune. The artificial song of the city doesn't come without consequences. One such man who learned this the hard way was Irish politician Dick Roach. In 2007, as Minister of Environment, Heritage, and Local Government, he signed an order to build a motorway that would destroy Lis Mullen henge. Lis Mullen henge was a 4,000-year-old astronomical observatory that was known as a fairy fort, a place where fairies live. According to IrishCentral.com, it was hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the last century. It was a place where humans and the little folk in the bushes could occasionally communicate. After its demolition, the fairies struck back. A cabinet member of Mr. Dick was seriously injured by a falling tree, and another almost got sucked out of a helicopter because the door flew off. Though he did win re-election in 2007, Dick was the only member of his previous cabinet to be demoted. He became merely the Minister of State for European Affairs. In December of 2008, Roach was held up by an armed gang at a luxury hotel after his daily swim for unrelated reasons. In 2011, he lost his next election entirely, ending an almost 3-decade career of upward momentum. I looked further into this curious tale of Big Dick. I dug through news reports, articles, anything I could find really,
and what I found was a run-of-the-mill politician with the status, personality, I guess, and connections to have a career that was, all in all, very successful up until, well, you know, he did that thing. The sparse YouTube comments from emotionally charged Irish indicated Dick Roach was quite despised. Good riddance to Roach, a complete waster. Very mild. Roach and the rest of Fianna Fáil are lying bastards and traitors. Though with some straggling support, overall, people did not like Roach. Roach is blamed in part for leading the Irish economy to a point where it needed a several billion-dollar bailout, despite the fact that he did everything he could to maximize profit, including paving over the old world for, well, this kind of new one. Perhaps a guy like this is just the kind of man who was waiting for societal justice to take him down. Or maybe it was cosmic justice. Did the fairies strike back? That seems like an irrational thing to say. The more we separated from this instinctual soup out in the trees, the more our intellect could think undisturbed within city walls. Logic and science thrived, and we forgot that everything ever accomplished by the intellect was born in the place where elves come from. But the realm of fairy rings with truth that could only be forgotten for 2,000 years. That's why art is again revolutionary, and nature's wrath can no longer be denied. The real reason for Roach's demise simply could have been the ebb and flow of politics, or some other weird internal behind closed doors thing. But his disrespect for the Fae and his eerie fall since is a strange reminder that spirits of nature haven't entirely left our minds. We exploited air, water, fire, and earth and used them to better our artificial world, and now a new beast is going for the throat of the modern world and its iron-boned skyscrapers, which... oh, surely that's why fairies hate iron. First, there was a melody of instinct, then an age of stone, then bronze, then iron. That's when clanking knights missioned their god across Europe and the Middle East until iron gun barrels made knights obsolete and native peoples outmatched. Then iron became an alloy that built steel cities that hungered for resources at all costs. Iron carries civilization on its back. It repressed hearts so economies could be built over ecosystems. Iron barred the realm of fairy from our minds, and for 20 centuries we forgot the irrational melody that spills from another realm. That's the story of fairies. The story you never knew.